We have operations located in around 30 countries where we have factories and offices, and our number one goal is to make sure that we're structuring our business in those markets.
John Deere, a name synonymous with American agriculture and industrial strength, has announced a dramatic shift in its operations that has sent shockwaves through both the manufacturing and agricultural sectors. Under the leadership of CEO John May, the company declared it would shut down its manufacturing operations in the United States and relocate production overseas. This historic decision comes in the wake of a series of sweeping trade measures implemented by newly elected President Donald Trump, who reintroduced aggressive tariffs on foreign imports, triggering retaliatory actions from key global trade partners. The announcement by Deere marks a pivotal turning point in the interplay between American policy, global economics, and the future of domestic industry. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Founded in 1837, John Deere has long stood as a pillar of American ingenuity, innovation, and rural identity. Its green and yellow machines are not just tools of the trade for farmers and builders, they are icons of a deeply rooted industrial heritage. Yet the economic realities created by abrupt trade disruptions have forced the company to reassess its operations. The reintroduction of steep tariffs by the United States government, framed as a move to protect domestic industries, has instead created significant friction across global supply chains. For a company like John Deere, whose products and parts are deeply embedded in international networks, the new landscape is increasingly untenable. At the heart of the issue is cost. The Trump administration's tariff policies were designed to make imported goods more expensive, thereby encouraging consumers and businesses to buy American. However, the complexity of modern manufacturing often defies such simple economic logic. Companies like John Deere depend not only on exporting their machinery to international buyers, but also on importing parts and components from around the world. When tariffs are imposed on these imports, production costs skyrocket. Simultaneously, the retaliatory tariffs from trade partners make it much more expensive for those foreign buyers to import American-made goods. The result is a double bind: higher production costs domestically and reduced demand abroad. For John Deere, the ripple effects of this trade war have become impossible to ignore. Manufacturing in the U.S. has become significantly more costly, while international sales, once a reliable growth engine, have slowed due to foreign tariffs on U.S. exports. With margins tightening and pressure mounting from shareholders, the company's leadership determined that remaining competitive required drastic action. Moving production facilities overseas offers an opportunity to circumvent many of the new financial obstacles. By relocating to countries unaffected by the U.S.-imposed tariffs or those with more favorable trade relations, John Deere can stabilize its production costs and restore access to global markets. This move is not without consequence. Thousands of American jobs are now at risk, particularly in the Midwestern states where John Deere's factories have been central to local economies. Cities and towns that have grown around these plants are now facing the threat of economic decline. The closure of a major manufacturing facility doesn't just impact those directly employed. It reverberates through entire communities, affecting suppliers, service providers, and local businesses that depend on the plant's presence. For decades, these towns have provided labor, loyalty, and support to the John Deere brand. Now they face a future clouded with uncertainty. On a broader scale, the announcement underscores the fragility of global interdependence in the face of nationalistic trade policies. When a country like the United States, long seen as a global leader in free market capitalism, turns inward and imposes restrictive tariffs, it disrupts more than just the domestic economy. It sends tremors through global commerce, altering trade flows, investment strategies, and production models. For multinational corporations, such unpredictability is a serious liability. Businesses thrive on stability, and when that foundation is shaken, relocation becomes a viable, if painful, alternative. The decision by John Deere also sends a clear message to policymakers. Protectionist policies can have unintended consequences. While the goal may have been to rejuvenate American manufacturing and protect domestic jobs, the actual effect has been the opposite. By making it more expensive to do business in the United States and harder to sell American products abroad, the tariff strategy has encouraged companies to look elsewhere for more favorable conditions. In this context, moving production overseas is not an act of disloyalty but one of economic survival. This development also raises important questions about the role of government in managing trade and economic policy. Should governments intervene heavily in global trade, or should they allow market forces to operate freely? The answer is rarely black and white. However, John Deere's move illustrates the cost of abrupt and sweeping intervention. Without careful consideration of supply chains, consumer behavior, and international diplomacy, such policies can do more harm than good, particularly for the very industries they intend to protect. For American workers, the implications are deeply personal. The jobs at stake are not just numbers on a balance sheet. They represent livelihoods, identities, and generational ties to a way of life. Many of these workers have spent their entire careers with John Deere, building not just machines but a legacy of American craftsmanship. The emotional toll of such a decision is immense, and the long-term effects on communities could last for decades. Reskilling and reemployment efforts may be deployed, but they cannot fully replace the sense of purpose and stability that long-standing manufacturing jobs provide. There is also a cultural dimension to consider. John Deere is more than a corporation. It is a symbol of American resilience and agricultural heritage. Seeing its production move abroad deals a symbolic blow to the image of American self-reliance and industrial might. It challenges the narrative that domestic manufacturing can thrive in a globalized economy when national policies disrupt the delicate balance that sustains it. For many, this feels like the loss of a national treasure, eroded not by foreign competition, but by domestic miscalculation. Furthermore, this shift could encourage other companies to follow suit. If a titan like John Deere concludes that the U.S. is no longer a viable base for manufacturing, it sets a precedent that other businesses may not ignore. The calculus becomes clearer: adapt or suffer. Corporations, especially those with international footprints, are increasingly sensitive to regulatory environments, tax policies, and trade agreements. Should the current landscape persist, the John Deere model may become the new norm rather than the exception. The economic logic behind the move is straightforward, yet the broader consequences are profound. Trade wars, while politically advantageous in some circles, often create winners and losers. In this case, the costs are being borne disproportionately by American workers, rural economies, and long-standing industries that form the backbone of the country's productive capacity. For policymakers, this development should serve as a stark reminder of the real-world impact of economic nationalism when it collides with the complex realities of global commerce. On the international front, Deere's relocation could also shift the dynamics of competition. By moving to a country with more favorable trade relations, John Deere can potentially gain a competitive edge over rivals that remain tied to the volatile American tariff regime. This could lead to a realignment of industrial power, with manufacturing strength gradually migrating away from the U.S. to nations better positioned to facilitate global trade. As a result, America's leadership in heavy machinery and agricultural equipment could slowly diminish, not through lack of innovation, but due to policy missteps. Investors and analysts are now closely watching the ripple effects across related industries. Suppliers that once fed into Deere's U.S. plants are now facing a sharp contraction in demand. Equipment dealers, maintenance contractors, and logistics providers must adapt to a shrinking domestic footprint. The agricultural sector, which relies heavily on timely access to machinery and parts, could also experience delays, higher costs, and reduced service availability. These disruptions extend far beyond the company itself, touching virtually every corner of the rural economy. At the same time, Deere's international competitors may seize the moment to expand their influence. With American-made equipment facing tariffs and production delays, foreign manufacturers could find new opportunities to capture market share. Brands from Europe and Asia, already well established in many regions, might now deepen their reach, capitalizing on the vacuum left by Deere's transition. In this way, the fallout from American trade policy is not merely economic, it's geopolitical. Educational institutions and trade schools may also feel the effects. Many have structured vocational programs around the needs of domestic manufacturers, training students for careers that are now in jeopardy. As the industrial base contracts, these institutions may be forced to rethink their curricula and focus more on globalized skills, automation, or even service-oriented roles. The impact on workforce development is likely to be long-lasting and multifaceted. Moreover, this decision is a reflection of the challenges facing multinational corporations in a world increasingly defined by political volatility. Whether it's tariffs, sanctions, or shifting alliances, businesses must now operate in a global arena where rules can change overnight. The capacity to adapt, both logistically and strategically, has become a core requirement for survival. For John Deere, this move is not simply about cost-cutting. It's about positioning the company for long-term resilience in a world where certainty is scarce. As communities reel from the announcement, political leaders are under pressure to respond. Some will call for subsidies or bailout packages to keep jobs at home. Others may propose legislative action to reverse or soften the tariff policies. But the larger issue remains: how to balance national economic interests with the realities of global interdependence. John Deere's decision exposes the tension between political rhetoric and economic practice, between short-term populist gains and long-term industrial strategy. The future of American manufacturing now hangs in a delicate balance. As one of the country's most iconic companies shifts its production abroad, the question is no longer just about trade policy. It's about identity. What kind of economy does the United States want to build? One rooted in protectionism and isolation, or one that embraces the complexities of global commerce? The answer may determine the fate of countless businesses, workers, and communities in the years to come. While this chapter in John Deere's storied history may not yet be its final one, it certainly marks a defining moment. The departure from domestic production is a stark indicator of how deeply economic decisions are shaped by policy environments. As machines begin to roll off foreign assembly lines instead of American ones, the implications will resonate far beyond the factory floor, reshaping the narrative of American industry in the 21st century. The departure of John Deere's manufacturing operations from the United States marks a watershed moment not just for one company, but for the philosophical and structural orientation of American capitalism itself. It's a striking demonstration of how quickly long-established assumptions can unravel under the pressure of global dynamics and political decisions. This shift is not simply about factories and machinery. It signals a fundamental transformation in how American businesses perceive their relationship with domestic economic policy, labor markets, and international competitiveness. As John Deere transitions its manufacturing footprint abroad, the realignment forces a reconsideration of the traditional understanding of corporate loyalty. For decades, there has been an implicit social contract between major American companies and the communities they serve, a tacit agreement that economic prosperity, jobs, and shared success would be nurtured through local production. However, with this move, that contract appears to be fraying. The decision underscores a modern corporate reality where strategic imperatives are no longer tied to national boundaries, but to cost structures, regulatory environments, and access to global markets. This development is likely to become a pivotal case study in business schools and policy circles for years to come. Analysts will pore over the sequence of events, examining how swiftly a change in national trade policy cascaded into such a drastic corporate strategy. It reveals the hypersensitivity of global supply chains and highlights the importance of consistency in governance. Businesses thrive on predictability. When that is lost, even the most historically rooted firms begin to question their place within national economies. Equally significant is the disruption to America's agricultural supply chain, which is intimately connected to companies like John Deere. With production moving offshore, farmers may find themselves grappling with new layers of complexity. Not only could there be delays in machinery availability, but the repair and maintenance infrastructure may also weaken domestically. Turnaround times for parts could increase, and specialized technicians may become scarce as the pipeline of trained workers adjusts to a manufacturing landscape no longer centered in the United States. Additionally, the psychological impact on the American farmer should not be underestimated. For many in rural communities, John Deere has long been more than just a brand. It is a trusted partner. The sense of pride that comes from using American-made equipment is deeply intertwined with cultural and national identity. The knowledge that this equipment is now being produced abroad might lead to a rupture in that emotional bond, sowing seeds of discontent. and perhaps even shifting loyalties toward emerging domestic brands that may attempt to fill the void. In parallel, the decision by John Deere could act as an accelerant for technological displacement. With fewer manufacturing jobs available domestically, there may be a push toward increased automation within the broader industrial ecosystem. This shift, while potentially beneficial from a productivity standpoint, could further marginalize blue-collar workers and deepen socioeconomic divides. As automation reduces the need for human labor, communities already affected by outsourcing may find themselves in a downward spiral, facing not only job loss but also diminished opportunities for future employment. The educational sector, too, will feel ripple effects. High schools, community colleges, and technical institutions that built entire programs around feeding skilled labor into John Deere's factories must now recalibrate. Curricula centered on hands-on mechanical training may lose relevance, forcing institutions to shift focus toward IT, logistics, or remote diagnostics. While such transitions are necessary, they may leave a generation of students caught in the crossfire, trained for jobs that no longer exist. The move also illustrates the increasingly modular nature of modern production. No longer confined by geography, corporations can now split operations across multiple continents with relative ease. This modularity gives firms like John Deere immense flexibility, allowing them to capitalize on comparative advantages in labor, taxation, and regulatory leniency. However, it also introduces vulnerabilities. A more dispersed production network means greater exposure to geopolitical risk, supply chain disruptions, and regional instabilities. In the pursuit of short-term efficiencies, long-term resilience may be compromised. Meanwhile, the impact on domestic innovation cannot be ignored. Manufacturing has always played a crucial role in fostering engineering advancements. The proximity of R&D to production facilities enables faster prototyping, tighter feedback loops, and a culture of iterative improvement. With production now moving overseas, the symbiotic relationship between design and execution could weaken. US-based engineers may find themselves disconnected from the physical realities of the machines they design, and this separation could erode America's competitive edge in industrial innovation over time. At a macroeconomic level, John Deere's exit is a barometer of broader trends reshaping global industry. It reflects a pivot away from the nation-state as the central axis of economic organization. Increasingly, multinational corporations are answerable not to domestic constituencies, but to global markets and shareholders. While this might enhance profitability, it raises difficult ethical questions about accountability and responsibility. When a company benefits from taxpayer-funded infrastructure, legal protections, and educational systems, does it owe anything in return when conditions change? This question becomes even more pressing as policymakers scramble to mitigate the damage. Incentive programs to retain domestic manufacturing may proliferate, but these measures are often reactive and costly. Offering tax breaks, grants, or regulatory leniency to stem the outflow of industry may provide temporary relief, but rarely address the structural challenges. Without a coherent long-term strategy, these efforts can resemble little more than band-aids over deep systemic wounds. In the international arena, John Deere's move could alter the competitive balance between nations. Countries that successfully attract this new wave of manufacturing will gain not only jobs, but also technological know-how, supply chain influence, and economic clout. They will be positioned to shape future industrial standards and practices, potentially outpacing the US in both efficiency and innovation. The cumulative effect could be a gradual erosion of American soft power, as economic leadership migrates elsewhere. There are also environmental implications to consider. Relocating production abroad does not inherently reduce carbon footprints. Indeed, it often increases them. Shipping large machinery or components across oceans contributes to emissions, and production in countries with looser environmental regulations may exacerbate pollution. Thus, while the decision may make financial sense in the short term, it could undermine long-term sustainability goals. For a brand like John Deere, which has invested heavily in its image of environmental stewardship, this may present a reputational risk. Labor dynamics in the host countries will also come into focus. While job creation in these regions is a likely benefit, it may come with strings attached. local workers could find themselves operating in challenging conditions with limited protections and fluctuating demand. The influx of foreign capital can revitalize economies, but it can also lead to exploitation if not carefully managed. It remains to be seen how John Deere will navigate these responsibilities and whether its corporate values will remain intact in a different geopolitical context. At the heart of all this is a fundamental tension between pragmatism and principle. John Deere's leadership has made a decision grounded in financial logic and strategic foresight. Yet it raises the uncomfortable reality that business decisions, no matter how rational, can still have deeply disruptive consequences. The question becomes how to build systems that allow companies to remain globally competitive without hollowing out the communities that helped build them. This moment also represents a test of public perception. How the American people respond to the loss of a storied manufacturer will influence not just the political narrative, but also future business behavior. If there is public backlash, consumer boycotts, or organized labor resistance, it could compel companies to think twice before offshoring. Conversely, if the response is muted or resigned, it may signal a broader shift in societal expectations, an acceptance that corporate nationality no longer matters in a global economy. There are signs that this shift in public sentiment is already underway. Younger generations, raised in a hyper-connected world, often view brands less through the lens of national identity and more through their values, quality, and social responsibility. For these consumers, where a product is made may matter less than how it is made and what the company stands for. This evolving mindset may create new pressure points for corporations, but could also allow greater flexibility in navigating the post-national business landscape. In Washington, the response to John Deere's decision will likely shape the next phase of economic policy. Legislators on both sides of the aisle will use the move to reinforce their respective agendas. Some will argue for deeper deregulation and tax reform to make the U.S. more attractive to business. Others will advocate for robust labor protections and industrial policy aimed at reducing dependency on global supply chains. The political ramifications could be long-lasting, influencing elections, shaping legislative priorities, and redefining the country's economic philosophy. Another emerging consequence lies in intellectual property and technological sovereignty. As production shifts overseas, there is always a risk of knowledge leakage. Techniques, designs, and proprietary processes, once guarded within domestic borders, become accessible to foreign partners, contractors, and governments. This diffusion can gradually erode a company's competitive advantage and even lead to the rise of local competitors using derivative technologies. For a company like John Deere, which operates in a sector increasingly influenced by data, AI, and automation, protecting intellectual property becomes both more difficult and more critical. For American foreign policy, this event could influence bilateral relations. Countries that gain new manufacturing plants may leverage their new economic importance in diplomatic negotiations. The U.S., on the other hand, may find its leverage diminished, particularly if such corporate migrations become a broader trend. Trade partners could see these relocations as endorsements of their own regulatory and tax environments, giving them added credibility on the global stage. At the cultural level, John Deere's decision challenges deeply held beliefs about American exceptionalism and industrial self-reliance. The image of the United States as the workshop of the world has long been a source of national pride. This move calls into question the viability of that image in the 21st century. It invites a collective reckoning with the fact that patriotism alone cannot compete with global market forces unless it's supported by strategic vision and structural alignment. The relocation also invites scrutiny of shareholder capitalism. In an era where quarterly earnings reports often outweigh long-term commitments to workers and communities, decisions like John Deere's become more common. The relentless drive for profit maximization, while logical within corporate governance frameworks, can often lead to social and economic dislocation. This raises pressing questions about the role of corporate governance, the accountability of boards, and the ethical dimensions of business strategy. In the immediate term, economic displacement will dominate headlines. But in the long term, the consequences of John Deere's departure may be most deeply felt in the erosion of faith. Faith in the American economic model, in the promise of upward mobility through hard work, and in the stability of legacy industries. As other companies observe Deere's move, a precedent is set. The gates are now open for similar decisions to be justified not as controversial departures, but as strategic necessities. This moment, then, is not just a story of one company's strategic repositioning. It is a microcosm of larger forces that are redefining the very structure of economic activity in the modern age. Globalization, technology, policy, and capital flows are converging in ways that challenge old assumptions and demand new frameworks. John Deere's shift abroad is not merely a business decision, it is a signal flare, illuminating the need for a deeper, more honest conversation about where American industry is headed and what must be done to steer it wisely into the future. The relocation of John Deere's production facilities abroad continues to send shockwaves through multiple strata of American society and the global economic landscape. The decision, driven by the changing geometry of international trade and national policy, has implications that stretch far beyond economics. It represents a redefining moment in the evolving relationship between corporations and the nation-state, highlighting the increasingly fluid borders of production, ownership, and accountability in the modern era. With the exodus of a company so rooted in American industrial history, attention now turns to how other sectors will respond. Heavy manufacturing is not an isolated industry. It is interconnected with logistics, finance, insurance, energy, education, and public infrastructure. When a major player like John Deere opts to exit the domestic production stage, entire networks that have long depended on its operations are destabilized. Railroads and freight carriers, for instance, will experience shifts in traffic volume and destination routes. What was once a reliable hub of outbound agricultural equipment shipping may now lie dormant, forcing transportation companies to recalibrate their logistics strategies or face underutilized infrastructure. Simultaneously, financial institutions that service both John Deere and its ecosystem are reevaluating their portfolios. Lending to US-based suppliers, subcontractors, and even equipment dealers becomes riskier when demand is projected to decline. Regional banks, often the backbone of financing for smaller manufacturers and service providers, may curtail lending or raise interest rates to hedge against perceived instability. This constriction in available credit could further erode the resilience of local economies and choke off entrepreneurial growth just when adaptation is most needed. Insurance companies, too, are re-examining their exposure. Policies tied to commercial property, factory operations, and large-scale machinery maintenance must now adjust for vacancy risks and changes in operational usage. Some policies may become obsolete, while others might be rewritten with vastly different risk profiles. This administrative burden will be passed down to smaller stakeholders, adding complexity and cost at a time when many are already facing declining revenues. Energy suppliers, particularly utilities that have scaled to serve large manufacturing facilities, now face an uncertain demand outlook. A John Deere plant consumes considerable electricity, water, and gas. The sudden absence of such a client can destabilize pricing models, impact rate structures for other customers, and delay or derail infrastructure investments previously justified by industrial demand. As energy providers reevaluate their future capacity needs, the ripple effects could alter long-term energy strategy in regions dependent on heavy manufacturing. In the academic and research sphere, the implications are equally profound. Universities that partnered with John Deere on innovation projects, testing labs, and industrial research now face funding shortfalls and the potential loss of vital real-world collaboration. Joint ventures around precision agriculture, autonomous machinery, and sustainable manufacturing practices might be put on hold, shelved, or transitioned overseas, taking with them years of institutional knowledge and expertise. Faculty with specialized skill sets may find their research sidelined, and students seeking internships or job placements may encounter a dearth of opportunities in fields that once flourished. At the municipal level, governments are bracing for the erosion of their tax bases. Manufacturing plants contribute significantly to local property tax revenue, business licensing fees, and payroll tax inflows. These funds support everything from public schools to emergency services. The departure of such a large employer will leave municipalities scrambling to fill budget gaps, likely leading to spending cuts, deferred infrastructure maintenance, and reduced public services. The long-term health of entire towns and counties may hang in the balance, especially in rural areas where John Deere operations were a dominant economic force. Politically, the move reconfigures the battleground. Representatives and senators from affected states are thrust into a high-pressure spotlight, expected to offer swift and convincing responses. Some may advocate for immediate tariff rollbacks or subsidies to entice Deere and potentially others to stay or return. Others might see this moment as an opportunity to double down on broader economic reform, arguing for reindustrialization through public investment, green technology incentives, and revised trade frameworks. What is clear is that John Deere's decision has handed political operatives a stark new reality around which campaigns and policy proposals will now be shaped. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on John Deere moving abroad? Will more companies follow? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.